Yep, this is it. This is the video that gets my YouTube channel canceled before it even really starts. But I don't care. I'm gonna do it anyway.
And public perception are becoming more pivotal component in how nations navigate war and how leaders...
There's a red line, but I'm never going to leave Israel. We cannot have 30,000 more Palestinians dead.
Have a red line. You know what the red line is? That October 7th doesn't happen again.
Welcome back to the channel. This is installment number 2 in the US versus the world saga, a 3-part series on a few of the skirmishes that America has stuck her nose into. The Israel-Palestine conflict is a very sensitive topic, and everybody's walking on eggshells, and it's like you can't say anything without being called anti-Semitic or receiving a ton of backlash. But you know what? I'm a black guy, so maybe I'll get some leeway. Or maybe not, because they did cancel Candace Owens last week.
Candace Owens, who's now left Daily Wire. Was she fired, or did she leave of her own volition?
I'm not going to speak to this topic, Piers.
At all?
At all.
You can't give me any insight into why she departed?
No hints, no nothing. I'm not going to speak to this.
And kicked her off of the Daily Wire, or she amicably left, or whatever the story is that they're trying to sell. Honestly, what I'm thinking is probably what everyone else is thinking. What is actually going on over there? Has Netanyahu lost his mind? And why is the US involved anyway? Now, I'm not going to get into who has a right to what land based off of the religious and historical impacts, because it ultimately comes down to what group you believe, who you believe has the stronger claim, and how religious you're going to pretend to be that day. Everybody's a hypocrite. So for this video being so controversial, I had to call in my alter ego, Lenny. What up, though? So if somebody gets canceled, it will certainly be him. Can't cancel somebody for telling the truth. So you'll see snippets of him here and there when I need to make a point that is less than popular. This is Lenny Johnson, and I did not kill myself. Now, an oversimplification of this war would be to say it's a war about land. It has always been about land, and it will always be about land. You could literally make a 10-hour video discussing this topic and all of the implications. I am not going to do that. This is going to be a very high-level discussion and just some of the basics. Israel is the only Jewish state in the world, and the land that they occupy is also coveted by Palestine. Wars have been fought over that land for some time with less than stellar outcomes and shaky, if not altogether failed agreements. The war in 1967 ended with Palestine occupying the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, but Palestine has been shrinking in territory for some time. Israel has a footprint in the West Bank, meaning they have troops on the ground, restricting Palestinian movements and activities, with checkpoints, barbed wire fences, the whole nine.
His Palestinian license plate is enough to get him stopped at the supermarket by security.
There's also a number of Jewish settlers, approximately 700,000, who have illegally built communities in the West Bank, which is supposed to be Palestinian land.
The United Nations and the European Union both regard the Jewish settlements as violations of international law, as they're built on occupied territory.
This is seen as one of the things that sort of spurred the creation of Hamas. I would say there's some debate on these settlements, but it's really a propaganda show because it seems pretty straightforward. It's like someone building a shack in your backyard and then screaming at you for you not being happy about it. Then going a step further and building like a fence around your garage and not allowing you to go to the grocery store.
450,000 Israelis are not something to be ignored, and you can't just classify several 100,000 people as criminals and think you'll be able to expel them for some political motives. Personally, I see no problem with the fact that we're living here. It's more of a question of how we live here, of how we behave, and how the other section of the population, the Arab inhabitants of Judea and Samaria, the Palestinians, behave towards us.
Some say these settlements improve security and development in the area. They also see these settlements as providing a legitimate reason for the IDF to operate in the West Bank, which creates a sort of buffer between Israel and Palestine. Others say this hurts the two-state solution. They point to the fact that these are Palestinian lands, and every Jewish settlement that has been built there was built there illegally.
This is what I experienced minutes after setting foot in my family's hometown. I'm in the old city of Hebron in the occupied West Bank, a place that once bustled with life. But I'm about to see what Israel's occupation and settlers have done to the heart of this city and to the people who live here.
The settlements and the presence of IDF impede on Palestinian sovereignty, which ultimately impacts Israel's proclaimed hopes for peace. So the West Bank and Gaza are supposed to belong to the Palestinians, but some Jewish settlers moved into the West Bank and won't get out? Sounds illegal, don't it? Now, Gaza, on the other hand, is controlled by Hamas. This is an Islamist militant group that has been responsible for some pretty awful things. Now, the current reignition of the conflict stems from an October 7th attack by Hamas that killed over 1,100 Israelis, mostly civilians, and took over 200 hostages, which about half are thought to still be alive in captivity.
On Saturday, Hamas launched an unprecedented attack, sending more than 1,000 fighters into Israel.
Men, women, and children were ruthlessly and mercilessly killed.
260 bodies were removed from the desert.
For the slaughter us there.
It was the largest mass murder of Jews in a single day since the time of the Holocaust.
The brutality of Hamas brings to mind the worst rampages of ISIS.
Israel and Netanyahu's response was to bomb everything in the Gaza Strip, killing more than 30,000 Palestinians. But you see, the story doesn't stop there. That's actually where it really begins. One of the biggest critiques of the war or the conflict or whatever you want to call it has been Israel's response. I think collectively the world agrees Hamas is terrible. They are just the worst. But if you join them in the murdering of innocent civilians and children, you have to question, what does that now make you? Since this version of the wars began, Netanyahu and Israel have eliminated multiple civilian targets, whether on purpose or on accident. About 3 weeks after the October 7th attack, an Israeli airstrike on a residential building killed over 106 civilians, most of those being children.
Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews at the time. He wanted to expel the Jews. And Haj Amin al-Husseini went to Hitler and said, if you expel them, they'll all come here. So what should I do with them? He asked. He said, burn them.
And this is one of the things you clearly do not understand. The same way most don't. Who are anti-Semites, who don't get it. I cry for what's going on in Israel. I cry just as much for what we are forced to do. Golda Meir had a great quote. She said that one day we may be able to forgive them for killing Israeli children. We will never be able to forgive them for making us kill their children.
And with this being the thinking of many of the supporters of the war, it's easy to see why the world is starting to turn their back on Israel. This guy obviously can't fight. If I saw him in the street, I'd punch him in the face. Side note, if this is the face of your religion, you need to find another religion. Just this week, Israeli airstrikes killed a convoy of aid workers that had just delivered food to the Gaza Strip. And the response from Netanyahu was like, oops. And then they reiterate it's wartime and stuff happens.
The World's Central Kitchen is pausing its Gaza operations after 7 of its workers were killed in an airstrike, leaving even fewer options for Palestinians on the brink of famine. They had just finished unloading 100 tons of food at a warehouse in central Gaza when the group says their cars were hit by an Israeli strike.
Unfortunately, in the last day, there was a tragic incident where our forces unintentionally struck innocent people in the Gaza Strip. It happens in war.
But it doesn't have to. In addition to the war, people in the Gaza Strip are unable to get food, water, basically all of the necessities. And it seems like Israel is not only unconcerned with this, but they are actually getting in the way of the resolution.
Israeli authorities have informed the UN that they will no longer approve any UNRWA food convoys to the north of Gaza. UNRWA has called the decision outrageous and says Israel is making it intentional to obstruct life-saving assistance during a man-made famine.
There's a humanitarian crisis going on. People are starving to death. And to add insult to injury, the good guys are bombing the civilian population. The biggest tragedy of war is that we become the thing that we are fighting to stop. Hamas is certainly a terrorist organization, but if we remove our humanity to combat them, then we become terrorists as well.
And what's going on in Gaza now is one of the worst humanitarian disasters in the modern history of the world. I mean, we're talking about the possibility of hundreds of thousands of children and others starving to death. And it's absolutely true that Hamas, a terrorist organization, started this war. But it is also true that right now, what Israel is doing is fighting not just Hamas, but going to war against the entire Palestinian people.
Now, no one, especially me, is suggesting that the Hamas attack was anything but horrific and despicable. But Israel's state-sponsored bombing of civilians and land grabs, that's exactly how you create Hamas. It's practically like dropping Gizmo in the water.
Great, thanks a lot. Sorry. Who's in that jar? Nothing, just water.
People under 25 are definitely not going to understand that. One thing I think we can all agree on is that war and killing innocent people is bad. And if you don't agree with that, well then, you're an asshole. And this video ain't for you anyway. So take your phone and chuck it out of the window. The proposed two-state solution seems like the best idea to solve this crisis, but neither side seems to be in a rush to implement that. So you have to wonder, why is the U.S. so involved and backing Israel? I mean, in order to really weigh in at this point, you'd have to pick a side and say that one or the other has a stronger claim, which we kind of already did by funding Israel since the 1970s with over $300 billion. And to really end this conflict, the U.S. would have to say, yes, Israel, this is all your land. Let us help you get it. And that, in essence, would be genocide. And really, who wants to play a hand in that? So whether it's security in the Middle East, ensuring that we have a foothold in that region, or some weird religious or philosophical idea that we should be hand in hand with Israel, if we are funding them, then we are complicit in the things they do. And speaking out about that is not anti-Semitic. As a matter of fact, it's the most patriotic thing you can do. Many in the U.S. are starting to distance themselves from Israel and the actions taken by Netanyahu, which a few years ago would have been unthinkable.
I mean, a mistake is when you take a wrong turn at a traffic light, or perhaps when a surgeon removes the wrong kidney. But when over the course of 6 months, half a year, you kill tens of thousands of people with perhaps additional tens of thousands buried under the rubble and decomposing, that's not a mistake. That's a deliberate policy, and that's why Israel has been hauled in front of the International Court of Justice on charges of genocide.
Even the president has came out and made statements condemning the acts of Israel, and this has really become a super divisive issue.
Tonight, a growing rift between President Biden and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after the president seemingly said an invasion into Rafah in the southern part of the Gaza Strip would be his red line.
It is a red line, but I'm never going to leave Israel. You cannot have 30,000 more Palestinians dead.
Remember when 3,000 people killed in October was too much? Now it's 30,000. It doesn't matter now. 100,000, it doesn't matter. 300,000, it doesn't matter. We've been lectured by the West for so long about like the values of humanity and Declaration of Human Rights, and then we just see that doesn't apply to us.
With all the issues going on here at the home front, our growing homeless population, our disintegrating cities, poor food quality, government corruption, failing schools, piss poor productivity and innovation, out of control inflation, and a populace that's more concerned with Diddy's sex life than the quality of the water they're drinking, I think it's time we start spending a little money to fix our house and less placing our thumbs on the international scale and being on the wrong side of history. Next video, we will discuss the U.S. Houthi skirmish. What the hell is a Houthi anyway? As always, if you enjoy this type of content, like, share, subscribe, and if I still have a channel after this, I'll keep bringing you the things that nobody wants to talk about. And instead of making America great again, how about we make America find our balls again?